Winfield Scott Hancock, and why we have slavery in America to this day. Alright, so many people want to argue that the Civil War was fought over states' rights. No, it was very specifically fought over less than 1% of the population's right to own other human beings. No, not okay. States' rights. The problem is, we had a guy named Abraham Lincoln who rode into the presidency on, very specifically, on his beliefs on slavery. The battle lines for the Civil War were drawn during the election. Many states stating outright that if Lincoln won the election, they were leaving. Why is it that the South was not as industrialized as the North? Is it because the South chose to enslave other human beings? Yes, it absolutely is, 100%. There were many, many, many inventions that were created in the South and in the North, where they didn't have as much proper soil and good mudland for growing a lot of the foods that the South had in abundance. Well, the North was able to outproduce them because of many Southern inventions. Inventions created in the South by people who thought that slavery was abhorrent or that it was not practical. Now, there's something that I talk about frequently on my channel, the Roman rentals. The Roman rental system. The system of taking somebody who doesn't have much of anything, making them the working class, and they have to live in abhorrent conditions. Whether or not you have a nice house does not decide whether or not you live in abhorrent conditions. Many times, whether you're allowed to own and live in that house is what's important. We can get into that later. That's a different argument. Now, this Winfield Scott Hancock feller, what's he really famous for? All right, so in the South, there was this big idea that Abraham Lincoln had that we could take some industrialization down to the South after the war. But on the way to deliver it, the wagon train, and it wouldn't have been across the West like many y'all think, the wagon train that was going south, and there was also an actual train. Well, wouldn't you know it, there was a bunch of people who were angry about the South losing the war, and they were still engaged in doing all sorts of really stupid things, and that includes knocking over the wagon train and knocking over the real train and lighting the real train on fire. And this feller was put in charge of how to maintain the South. Meanwhile, he was basically a Southern sympathizer who fought for the war on the North side. He believed many of the things that the South believed, but he chose to fight for the North. He understood logistics quite well. That's what he did, paperwork. He knew which side was going to win before the war started. Amazing, isn't it? Now then, when he was in the South, he believed that It was not the Army's job, despite his orders, to act as an occupying army, especially in the case of a democracy. The importance of soldiers at the polling booth cannot be overstated. Somebody whose job and duty is to protect the American people and their rights, well, this was not upheld by Mr. Hancock. He did not believe that, he believed that that was an infringement on the states' rights. He wanted to give everything back to the South, basically. Everything right back to the Southern lawmakers, allow them to go into what we know now as Jim Crow laws. But primarily they were anti-homeless laws, something that a lot of people don't want to consider. There's also the forced labor camps. We more often like to associate these things with the Nazis, but here in the United States, we just call them something different. We call them chain gangs. Why were chain gangs ever allowed? This is because of the 13th Amendment. The exact constitutional amendment that made slavery illegal. Well, it didn't make it illegal. It made it legal for every state government. Notice how I said state government. That's right. The 13th Amendment made it very clear that slavery was perfectly legal in the case of someone being convicted of a crime. It doesn't say what crime, and it doesn't say how much time you owe. Those laws were used for hunting homeless. Were. Do you like that word? A lot of people, when they talk about what I went through, it's past tense, isn't it? Well, it's not. It's not past tense. Neither is slavery in America. The 13th Amendment needs to be abolished. I am not saying that slavery should be legal. I'm saying it should be entirely illegal. No more of this railroading homeless people in kangaroo courts over laws that were very specifically made, meant, and written to prevent black people from being allowed to have any power in the South. Hancock, when there was more than one assembly and or vote, Hancock himself personally, at his own personal liberty, chose to remove the names of 9 of the people that were to be voted on the ballot, 7 of them very specifically being black. Those black individuals constituted the only black folks in that area to be attempting any such thing. So everyone who was black on the ballot was removed by Hancock himself. He was a very devout racist. Would have been nice to know, right? During the war. But he was a hero during the war for a reason. However, being a certified Civil War hero, fighting for the North, and he did more to destroy America after the war was over by not following orders, not complying with the actions and requirements of the occupying army, which is, hate to say it, that's what they were. The North needed to act as the occupying army. When it came to votes, voter suppression was at an all-time high. After the Civil War, there were so many people that were hateful. What was a black man's chance of having a rifle? What was a black man's chance of having a handgun? These people were slaves. They were dropped off with absolutely nothing. Much like we do with who? With poor people. What do we do with poor people? We steal their children and we put their children in the system, and then we tell the parents they owe us a bunch of money. They're not paying us, they're paying the government for taking their kids. And we all comply, and we don't stop to look at where these laws started and why. It's control over a very specific populace. At the time, it was very specifically control over black slaves. However, it wasn't just used for black slaves. In the South, there was a bunch of Civil War soldiers that were disabled after the war, couldn't find jobs after the war, couldn't afford to live it on a N-word's wages. Many of them were rounded up, same thing. No problem, they'll find a way for you to work. So, this Mr. Hancock, after removing all of the black folks from the ballot, also removed the soldiers that were supposed to protect the ballot and polling places, and allowed the South to go through and do what they'd done since the very beginning. Say in the name of Jesus, and then utilize their guns. Whatever law you may think of passing, it's not going to make any difference when you've got a Southern Christian with a gun. Don't make no difference whatsoever. Now, there was also the nastiness. Here's the situation with knocking over the wagon train. It was going down a road. It was going to I want to say Richmond. Is that it? But there were literally thousands of black people hung from telegraph poles. Thousands of them. How horrible is that? And of course, who's going to want to give any sort of equipment to people who are doing stuff like that? No, absolutely not. The problem is it left the Southerners in dire need of something that was already on the way. It was because of the abstinence and obstinance of a very small number of people that really screwed up the entire South and the rest of the United States, for that matter, ever since. The Roman rental laws, the idea that you can own way more than you will ever need. You'll be allowed to own so much that you can set your own price. That you can live beyond your means by forcing others to exceed their means in order to have basic survival, in order to have just the most basic roof over their head. And then, of course, there's the government's hand in everything. They got to tax everything and have 4,000 people involved in everything. We have to create jobs. Well, now we've got 400 middlemen all driving around the country working for somebody else who owns a company, who is getting kickbacks and kickdowns. Because why? Because we needed to create some jobs, and now they're paying taxes. But do we really need all of these jobs? Are we creating fruitless infrastructure? Absolutely. Like a bunch of ants moving rocks just to move rocks. They don't even know where they're moving them to except outside. There's no reason to move any more of them. They're not expanding anything. They're just making things weaker by doing so. And utilizing a lot of resources in the process. And then I see what's happening to the homeless to this day. Well, you guys are talking about how horrible it is these things are happening to black people. They're happening to poor people. Poor people. A lot of these places where you're saying that black folks won't have access, there's a lot of white folks in those areas too that'll have very, very little, if any, access themselves. Now, this Hancock feller, he even ran for president against Ulysses S. Grant, who was also he was a heartless bastard. Let me tell you what. Sure, he was a northern hero, but he was pretty mean to slaves. Him and, who was it, Sherman? I don't know. Now, there were multiple attempts that were basically thrown away up until the beginning of World War I. That's when America really started to ramp up the South. For the most part, Virginia wasn't considered northern or southern. It was considered a southern state, which is why Washington, D.C. was stationed inside of Virginia. But then Virginia was separated because the Civil War. The North had to create a buffer zone for the protection of Washington, D.C., protect it from the South. We had a lot of people who fought that war. Over 600,000 Northerners and over 400,000 Southerners. It's 1 million people in all. That's a lot of people that died. But the thing about those 600,000 Northerners is that they did individually, every one of them, specifically die to make slavery illegal in the United States, and then we still didn't make it illegal. We left that one little footnote in the 13th Amendment that allowed us to victimize anyone we want in kangaroo courts. Primarily the mentally ill and the disabled and the homeless. See, all those black folks that used to live in, a lot of them, the equivalent of chicken coops, no longer had that. And they could get some pretty hefty fines that would guarantee poverty for the rest of their life. Would require them to go to debtor's prison, which we're not supposed to have to this day. We're not supposed to have that, but a lot of people are. We've got a lot of people who are locked up simply because they're broke. Simply because, officers, when they do something wrong, know that they can arrest somebody at will. Anything that they want to say, they're allowed to do that. If the person doesn't have the money for a real lawyer, which is assumed based on poverty. How poor do you look? Well, how poor do I look? Look at the conditions I live in. This is my house. A lot of people feel real upbeat about coming and kicking me while I'm down, about telling me how to think and how to feel and where I should go. where I should expend resources that I don't have, what I need to get in order to be taking care of myself. Basically, everybody's, you need to get this or you need to get that or I ain't going to help you. I got that stuff. You still didn't help. All you did is tell me where to spend my money. At least some of y'all tell me to spend my money on me instead of telling me, oh, well, I need this and I need that. And then I can, because, when I end up spending all that money that people expected, that's the key word right there, expected. I spent a lot of money on help that I didn't get. And I had to just hope that they weren't going to take advantage of me and play on the mentally ill crap. Some of them actually did have good intentions, and I will vouch for those good intentions in the beginning. But later on, despite their original intentions, because of the nature of the situation and the rumors that started all this crap, people just wanted to hide. They wanted to hide their involvement, hide their names, and say, oh, well, I sent you $50, that's good enough. No, it's not. No, it's absolutely not. That's not the same thing as coming forward and telling the truth to the public or to the courts. That's not the same as acting as a friend or family. And that's how we end up with this situation that we're in now, where we've got so many people that, and I'm sorry, I'm looking around for tobacco in my vehicle. We've got so many people who are victimized over Jim Crow laws that, well, they simply never went away. A lot of these Jim Crow laws, like I said, they're anti-homeless laws. So no matter who it is, if they end up homeless, then they're assumed to be to blame. Now, when we look at the laws reflect what? They certainly don't reflect the reality of the situation, which is that the primary victims are the homeless. The primary victims of these rental laws are people that didn't own property, don't own property, don't have rich parents, or even parents that care in most cases, don't have brothers and sisters that are able to help them out. So your assumptions of what situation they're in become that much more destructive in these situations. Because then they're stuck with your assumptions. Your assumption that these laws were somehow written in a just manner or just fashion. And it was people like Mr. Hancock that made it that way. All those soldiers who gave up their lives to end slavery. And in the end, we still have slavery. What did they give up their lives for? Those of you who want to talk about all these white people and white people's rights, well, look at how our rights as white people were destroyed there too. It doesn't matter what color skin you have. Those anti-poor laws guarantee that the working class is always going to pay. Always going to pay. Their entire lives they're going to pay. There's a lot of folks right now that are pissed off that they've been working construction for years. And after working construction for years, there's people that work fast food that want to get paid equal pay. Oh, how dare they? How dare they? You know what? I've worked fast food and I've worked construction, and I'd rather work construction, even though construction does not pay as much in most cases. When you're a disabled person, people just assume you're retarded. They don't want you to touch the tools. So you end up doing the grunt work, and the grunt work doesn't pay much. Of course, when you get a job at a place like McDonald's, people generally tend to talk down to you like you're retarded if they know you have a disability. Or they want to ask questions at inappropriate moments just because they know that it gives them a sense of power. Like, all right, there was a lady when I worked at Arby's, and she liked to call out one of the ladies who worked there specifically because she knew that lady was depressed. She'd had her kids taken after her husband was beaten up. and her husband got beaten up because he beat her up. So it was a very complicated situation, and the lady was depressed over not having her kids. And one of our bosses just kept on bringing it up at the most inappropriate moments. We're in Longmont, Colorado, and there's 30, 40 customers in the store, and here she is screaming this stuff at this other employee. Definitely not appropriate. And this is one of the other things that Hancock did. He let his personal politics, once the Civil War was over, his personal politics and his personal beliefs aligned with the South. He was one of the few Democrats that was a general in the Civil War for the North. The Democrats were considered the slavery states, the Democratic states, and the Republic states. Of course, this is Abraham Lincoln's party, and they're the ones who are most associated with modern slavery today. Abraham Lincoln is recognized the world over as a great leader. Even the Russians did write books about Lincoln. Matter of fact, Mr. Marx, when he wrote his personal Communist Manifesto, was very much using Abraham Lincoln in his own mind, according to his own description. Now, I wish I could remember the quote that he made about Abraham Lincoln, because I do believe that it's important. I've had a few Russians quoted at me, which is amazing to me, because it's just one of those things that Russians were taught, Japanese were taught. Abraham Lincoln is probably one of our most famous presidents. I mean, a lot of people know George Washington because he was the first one, but they don't realize how potent and how powerful a man Abraham Lincoln had to be to stand up to the people that he stood up to. His vision for the end of the war, however, and the things that were set up beforehand, the infrastructure for the South to help them rebuild quickly, the new machinery to help out with many of the jobs that were previously done by slaves. But this wasn't a free handout to the South. This wasn't like they were going to march in with all of this newer modern equipment like they have in the North and just give it to the South. No, you were still going to need people that were going to work that equipment. You were going to still need to pay for it. And the way that it was envisioned for the South to pay for it was by, of course, teaching trades to black people. Was that all of it? No. Even after the war, and to this day, many black people still flee the South because of oppression, because of racism, because of hatred, because of cyclic familial thinking. You believe it because that's what your granddaddy taught you. Living in the equivalent of rats' nests compared to those around them. And then, of course, we're told that that's for black people. Ghettos are for black people. Blah, 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 blah. Ghettos is a name that was used in Germany. You know what the Warsaw Ghetto was? Yeah, that was a ghetto. Yes, we have ghettos all over the United States. People of all colors, all races, all religions. Being poor is pretty universal, though. And then, of course, Congress and the Senate and the local Senate and state Senate and all this other crap, they all want to vote in these laws with no teeth. So we got a social worker, right? We got 20,000 homing units. Let's say in the New York area, there's about 20,000 of their housing units. Government housing. Now, what is this paid for? This is paid by our tax dollars, right? For people to be stuffed into sardine cans by the thousands. And we think this is a good idea. We think that it's not going to turn into squalor. We put services miles and miles and miles away from people who really need to access it. Many of these programs, the people that it's supposed to be made for, supposed to be created for, never have access to it. Because the people writing the laws aren't considering, well, our availability to get somewhere, our disabilities, our impairments based on society's judgment. In the South, had Mr. Hancock acted as an occupying general and followed his orders, well, that would have allowed a lot of black people to vote. That would have also allowed a lot of black people to be local representatives because they had the numbers. There were more black people in the South than white people. 1% of Southerners owned, well, less than 1% of Southerners owned slaves, but they owned like 4 million of them, which is a massive number. After losing as many people as they did, it wasn't just soldiers who died. We're talking about just the North losing 600,000, the South losing 400,000. Southern industry basically relied on state-sanctioned slavery after the Civil War. The repeated attempts to take machinery down there and utilize this machinery to actually industrialize the South. We didn't really get any of that stuff coming into action, other than the oil fields of Texas and a couple of minor shipyards. Until World War I come about, none of it was truly industrialized. It was always lagging. During World War I, we had to force the South to produce. And how do we explain that? Was it at gunpoint? No, but damn near. Very damn near. A lot of Southerners sided with Ireland and wanted to be friends with Germany. That was their idea of a good time. Now, don't get me wrong, World War I was fought over very different ideals than World War II. World War II, we had Adolf Hitler trying to tell everybody that the Germans are superior racially. We had the Japanese claiming that they're superior to everyone racially, and these guys are friends with each other and look nothing alike. So we got Fritz Sauckel and Heinrich Himmler during World War II. They wanted to figure out what to do with the Jews, with the homeless, with the sickly, with the crazies. And they certainly did. After World War II, America looked at the efficiency of what was done with our laws over in Germany, and we realized we could make a lot of profit off of it, and we've been doing so ever since. Slave labor. You find people who don't have the money to defend themselves. You use them to fill up the jails and the prisons. Officers get used to railroading them, and then they spend a lot of time learning how to railroad homeless people and how to shoot people. And on how to identify who they're allowed to do that with. If it's somebody in a house, you better think twice. They might have, even if they're in a poor house, if they're in a poor neighborhood, they might have an uncle or an aunt or a mommy or a daddy or somebody who's got some money and helping them out. If they're on the street, you know that nobody's helping them out. If they're stuck in a trailer park, there's a very slim possibility that they're getting sufficient enough help from anybody they're getting help from to actually afford a lawyer. It's not likely that they have an aunt or uncle or anyone like that who's going to put out money for a lawyer. When you guys talk about pro bono lawyers, there is a way to get them, and that requires having a friend or family member who is involved, who actually cares, who looks at evidence, and who treats you like you're a person instead of trying to talk you out of it. Some people will talk you out of it under a threat of violence or actual violence. If the police do that, what do we call it? Pain compliance. If it's your aunt or your uncle or your dad or your mom, your brothers or sisters who abuse you financially, it's against the law. If the police do it, though, they get to have access to the evidence. They get to do with it as they please, whether it's against the law or not. If they're unsupervised, who's to stop them? Now then, we've got all the places and all the services that are supposed to help out victims of abuse. Most of these are primarily geared towards helping out women, and primarily women who are parents, which means a lot of irresponsible people. If they were responsible, they wouldn't have gotten pregnant. In most cases. Now, we know there's exceptions, and you guys can be pissed off and argue that stuff. I'm not going to agree or disagree with you. There's a lot of messed up things in the world I don't agree with. But right now, we're talking about basic human rights. Homeless people, you have to try to find an address, and you have to try to stay in that area and be able to utilize the mail in that area. And a lot of the stuff that you're required to have, you have to have an actual address. In today's economy, that requires somebody else, somebody who's, of course, not a judgmental prick, somebody who's not going to assume they know your situation better than you and tell you what it is that you need to do after 5 minutes of looking it up. I've been experiencing this for 6 years, and it's always the same thing. I'm a male, and I'm homeless, and people want to assume that because I'm white, that I get a special white privilege check. I don't. I get disability money that is not enough to survive on for a month, and I'm forced to travel from place to place, having to fear abuse by police because I was abused by a police officer who's no longer an officer because he kept on assaulting homeless people. And this is what my point is coming to on that. All the money that's paid out for situations like the death of Mr. Miles and his family having to get paid $3.2 million. These were Mr. Miles's predators, got $3.2 million because of a false arrest. How many times have they done that to me? No matter what, they can manufacture a reason. As long as they can keep you from seeing the body camera evidence, who cares? as long as they can prevent me from having access to it by assuming I'm retarded and telling me that it's going to take an act of God. No, 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 no. There is a legal course of action here. My public pretender, absolutely, all of them refusing to requisition evidence, including body cameras. When they finally did, that's when the charges were dropped. Without fail, every time. But then there's the harassment and the intimidation that continues to go on. Well, I'm trying to turn in these officers, and I already know what route I'm supposed to take legally, but I have to go in alone. And I'm told this is because right now we're fighting for black people's rights. When are we ever going to be allowed to have our own? By fighting for the homeless, I am fighting for black rights because there are black people on the streets. By fighting for the homeless, I am fighting for religious rights because there are people of every religion on the streets. When you talk about equality, you and I have a different idea of equality. You have the ability to do a lot of things that I don't have the ability to do, and you take them for granted every single day. And every time you assume that I should be able to do it because you can, you are showing how pampered you are. You are showing how lucky you are that you aren't in this situation, that you aren't taking this abuse. And you guys want to pretend that because I'm not being punched in the face right this moment, that I'm not being abused. No, that is not the case. I have to be afraid anywhere that I go in this town. I have to be afraid to drive my vehicle. I have to be afraid that everything that shows my innocence, and that's the most important part. People's slander was allowed to destroy my life, and I was never allowed to defend myself against it, ever, due to poverty. Every judge in America knows this is happening. Every public pretender, every prosecutor, every officer, they all know how easy it is to railroad a homeless person and get away with it. Darren O'Connor spoke several times on my channel about that. Where does all this money come from? Well, it comes from programs that you keep handing over to the sheriff's department. The $95,000 given to Sammy Leon Lawrence IV after he was assaulted by Waylon Lola Ty. The $132,000 that was given to Zaid Atkinson. Let's see, Sammy Leon Lawrence IV, Zaid Atkinson, Mr. Miles. We're talking about, what is that? $3.4 million, a little over. Almost $3.5 million. Just between three people. Two of those people were abused by Officer Waylon Lola Ty. They were all abused in Boulder. There were 7 people overall on camera, myself included, in 2018, of which I was the first. The ones who got money were the ones in houses. That would be Mr. Miles, Mr. Atkinson, and Sammy Leon Lawrence IV. Now, are these people slaves? No, they are not. When Sammy Leon Lawrence IV says he's afraid to go places, but he's got a roof over his head, he's not dependent upon others who have ulterior motives. A lot of my witnesses were afraid to come forward because they didn't want people bringing up that they were drug dealers in court. I don't care. If drug dealers that even admitted that they were drug dealers have been convicted multiple times of drug dealing, want to accuse you of being a drug dealer so their voice will be heard, you just bring up the fact they're a drug dealer too. There's people like me who have never been drug dealers. And I got to depend on drug dealers because those are the people out on the streets who kind of sort of look out for you. Like how a pimp kind of sort of protects you. Well, not necessarily. A lot of times the people who are going to watch your bag, yeah, they'll watch somebody walk off with it, especially if it's the cops. They don't know what's in your backpack. They don't know what kind of habits you got. You might have some habits in the closet they didn't know about. Or maybe a murder weapon in your back pocket, because sometimes, people do something stupid and they want to run and hide from it. They'll run all sorts of places. Then we get those people and their bad attitudes in our homeless communities. And a lot of those people in those homeless communities were victimized to it because of laws that were created after the Civil War. Laws that were allowed to be created that prevented certain people from having property if their granddaddy didn't have property. Prevented them from voting. It's because we had people in the North who were still politically motivated in their decisions. Mr. Hancock did more damage to the United States and to the world based on the example created by the South, utilized by the Nazi regime, and later amplified and created excess. All these programs that we had in the 90s given to sheriff's departments, battered women's programs, battered women's shelters, they were given up to the local sheriff's departments in the 80s and 90s. And the local sheriff's departments couldn't stop confusing the working class people in houses who actually had a decent job, bricklayers and such. Well, they got the money to sue your dumb ass. Once in a while, you see a homeless guy at the bank, and you as an officer, you know that people don't want them homeless people around. They make stuff look bad, so you go and you falsely arrest him and beat him up, and lo and behold, now your superior officer is asking for something that he's never asked for you before. He wants to actually review the body camera evidence of what happened on a particular day with a particular homeless person that turns out his family just bailed him out and they're fucking suing you. So the money that was donated for that, it all ends up getting used to pay Sammy Leon Lawrence IV, to pay Zaid Atkinson, to pay the family of Mr. Miles. It goes to paying people in houses. That's these programs go to. And there's ones for homeless people. All these programs that are supposed to help out the homeless, and why don't they? Well, it's because all the money that you spend on individual programs, not profit programs, non-government programs, you spend that money and they've still got people that are on the board of directors want to take a bunch of money. Get paid a lot of money. We got situations where industrialized equipment meant for certain areas just never arrived. For whatever reason. We've got pivotal moments in history where something great could have happened. But it didn't because of the loss of one important leader. The 13th Amendment, as it was written, is flawed, but so is the Constitution. Many of the laws that we have concerning voting, well, all right, these are now constitutional amendments. When is it going to be time for homeless people to be allowed a part of that Constitution? Now we handed over all these programs that used to belong to the homeless. Programs in Boulder, Colorado that were started by the homeless. And now all these programs have been handed over to the sheriff's department or the police department, and they've been closed down. Meanwhile, there's a lot of people who did donate money to these programs. That money was put into accounts to help these programs be run and managed. And when the sheriff's department and the police department were able to con and connive the local government into doing illegal things, they got all those donations that were meant to help homeless people that did not have families, the ones most likely to be victimized by our police departments, the ones most likely to be murdered by our police departments and our sheriff's departments, the ones most likely to be thrown into jail, because as long as we can keep throwing people in jail, we can pretend that we're solving these crimes, and we can also doctor up some numbers that make it easier for us to victimize the ones we want. Now we want to talk about how police often try to plant evidence on black people, and then we've got all of this evidence to the contrary. Is it evidence to the contrary on them planting it on black people? No, it's evidence to the contrary of the narrative that it's happening specifically to black people. That they're the most marginalized, they're the most victimized, they're the most killed. No, the homeless are the most killed per capita. If black folks and homeless folks had the same population size, had equal population size, but police murdered us at the same rates that we are now, the police would murder over 48,000 homeless people every year. So it's a good thing there aren't 60 million homeless people. That would account for over 99% of those killed by police. As it stands, men are the most likely to be killed. It's not because men are more violent. It's because it is more socially acceptable to kill a man. A man can go to prison over mere accusations. He can have all of his rights denied outright just because he's a male, just because of bias and assumptions. And as soon as you run into those, well, the law goes right out the window. If nobody cares about the individual enough to fight for their rights, that individual does not have the right to those rights. If they have the money to hire someone to actually care about their rights, or they have family that actually cares, or a friend who actually cares, it does make all the difference in the world. Slavery in the United States is only here because we allow it. Allow it. You want to talk about all these principles that you hold dear. Are you willing to give up your life for those ideals? I'm not asking if you're willing to take another person's life. I think that's horrible. I don't think anybody should be killing anybody. But in this particular case, the most marginalized portion of our society is the homeless. The group chosen most often by serial killers for victims is the homeless. When the police choose to go shoot somebody, same thing, the homeless are at the top of the list. You are more likely, as a homeless person, to be killed than you are to be killed as a male. But then you also have to increase that exponentially because you're a homeless male. No matter how hard I fight for people's rights, these folks all have their own special groups. Like Wraith understands that these abuses against the homeless aren't just happening to gay people, but he's only willing to fight for the rights of gay people. There's a few other people that I know that they're only willing to fight for the rights of gay people, not LGBT or LGBTQ, just gay people. And when they're victimized over being homeless, they want to pretend that it's because they're gay, because nobody cares about a homeless person's rights. They do care about gay rights. If you're a black person who's also homeless, you really learn to push the fact that you are black. They did this to me because I'm black. Or when you're a woman, they did this to me because I'm a woman. They did this to me because I'm a woman. Meanwhile, it's shown on nearly all these numbers that the majority of the people that you are assigning the blame to are homeless people. The number one victims are the homeless. Over and over and over again. Per capita, hell yes. When 49% of those killed in 2019 were homeless and 51% were disabled and 22% were black. We had to really take a look at that, didn't we? Because there were 60 million black people and they accounted for only 22% compared to only 500,000 homeless people who accounted for 49%. And in that year, we had it shoved in our face how many times that black people are the most marginalized in our society. We get all this religious division. I've seen Christians my entire life persecute others and then whine that they were being persecuted. I see Christians persecuting Christians in this country, and it's disgusting. I hear Baptists blaming Lutherans, and I hear Lutherans blaming Baptists, and I hear Catholics blaming everybody, especially the devil. Always got to blame the devil. We cannot take responsibility for our actions when we've got a devil that we can blame. Meanwhile, we got a government and a police force that believes that they should be a blameless society, but only they. This is tyranny, folks. When you can deprive somebody of literally all of their rights merely by calling them mentally ill and abusing them to the point that they have a mental breakdown, and then you can abuse them further for having a mental breakdown, take away anything and everything that they have, everything that they've earned, and also deprive them of the assistance of those who are trying to help through threats, harassment, and intimidation. Then there's the arrest record. If you're arrested for something that you didn't do, that should never stay on your arrest record, especially when the charges are dropped. When bad police officers do bad shit to somebody, yeah, that's one of their tactics, press false charges, because those false charges are immediate. Whereas you're going to find an uphill battle if you are a homeless and disabled male trying to turn in a fucking cop. If that's what you're trying to do, you get sent literally to the officers you are trying to turn in. I got sent to Amanda Jonas, Officer Amanda Jonas of Longmont, Colorado. I got sent to her to investigate herself. I got sent to Officer Schneider in Washington State to investigate Officer Schneider. I got sent to Scott DaCosta repeatedly to turn in Scott DaCosta. How appropriate is this? How appropriate is it for an at-risk and disabled adult with no representation to be forced to try to turn in his predators literally to those predators themselves? When I have to turn in crimes committed against me by Scott DaCosta, literally to Scott DaCosta, and then I am arrested and assaulted for trying to turn in Scott DaCosta, you'd think that someone would care, rather than letting all of your tax dollars go to waste. All of the money that was supposed to go to helping me as a disabled person, to have a safe environment, to be able to afford my bills, to be able to have someone I could go to for assistance if I am abused so that I don't get blown off when crimes are committed against me. But I can't do that, can I? The term mentally ill is too powerful now. Too much propaganda telling you everybody that shoots anybody ever is mentally ill. That these people who are victimized to the point that they can't see any other options, nobody will listen to them. All they can think about at that point is going in and getting their vengeance or stopping those people from doing it to others. So here in America, we're world famous for school shootings, aren't we? Those are popular. We don't make the distinction between somebody who's mentally ill in a way that he's going to go hacking people in half in Idaho, and somebody who's mentally ill because they got PTSD from getting the shit beat out of them and told that it's their fault for being different. Being drugged for being different. You know how fucked up it is that Tourette syndrome doesn't hurt anybody, but the medications that they give you to treat it can literally kill you? Western medicine, right? Yeah. Many of us out here on the streets would be and could be productive members of society if we were allowed. If it wasn't literally too expensive to get off the streets. My disability money, I was supposed to get back payments. And those back payments were supposed to help me to be able to afford a place, to be able to set some money back, to be able to have an environment of my own where I'm not subservient to others, where I don't have to depend on alcoholics, where I don't have to depend on other people in desperate situations. Most of the people who knew what was going on and knew I was telling the truth, at least about their part of the story, were so busy in desperate situations of their own. Between drug addictions and beatings and having to move repeatedly and having their phones stolen, being called mentally ill and locked up because they're homeless, being beaten up by ex-girlfriends or ex-boyfriends that can't take no for an answer, having people spread rumors about them. And there's nobody there to defend them, and many of them, after telling me they understand and they'll help me any way they can, then they don't help me how they can, the most simple way that they can. But they claim they can't do that. And then their reason is nearly always because when they were in that situation, nobody helped them. Well, who did you ask? You probably asked nearly everybody you knew, just like I did. And what you got was, hey, you just need to ignore it and be a good slave. Sure, you are never going to be allowed the benefits of this society. And in order to get $50 worth of food for a month for you and your kid, you're going to have to go through 5 days that you're going to have to spend $50 each day to do that, and spend the entire day going to these crappy ass meetings, and then what have you done? You've lost 5 days of your life. You've lost $250, and you've only got $50 worth of groceries to show for it. The problem with a welfare state, that's not what we have. When you are abused as a disabled person, you're supposed to go to a friend or family member, and they're supposed to help you turn it in. If you don't have a friend or family member to help you with that, they send you to mental health. In these mental health places, if you have a friend or family member then to help explain what's going on, these mental health places are required by law to do something about it. But without a friend or family member, just like going to the cops, without a friend or family member, we get blown off. These people get to write us off as a tax write-off, or in the case of, well, Region 2 Nebraska and Region 1 Nebraska, we get the situation of they have an overwhelming caseload, especially in poor areas and poor neighborhoods. They don't have enough. So what they end up doing is getting as many signatures as they can, as many names as they can as clients, so they can get money for having them come in. And then they come in week after week after week. You got to come in for your appointment, or they cut you off from services immediately. If they find out you're getting services from somewhere else, then they'll cut you off because there's a conflict there. The government is not going to pay for you to see 2 therapists. When you're told that you have to go to 3 therapists and get an opinion from all 3 of them, and you're told that you're going to get dropped from all of the services that you're getting if you go and do that. If you go and do what you're legally told that you're supposed to do, then this place will have to drop you from services. Region 1, Region 2, and who else was it? Marcia Estrada in specific, her and Penny Cooper with Cirrus House, I believe is what it's called, at a Scotts Bluff. They wouldn't work together. I was willing to sign all of the paperwork that I needed to. I needed to get to a place where I had not been abused yet. And that was part of the reason for going to McCook. My safety in Chapel, Nebraska, because of the ongoing abuse from Sheriff Scott DaCosta, it's way too costly. People were allowed to beat on me whenever they wanted, even for following their own instructions. Like when I followed Josh Rayborn's, here's the situation. At Josh Rayborn's, he wanted to make sure that the house was safe. Especially since there was people that were going to be moving into the house because they were buying the house. Now he had to leave and it was an emergency. His friend Barbara was supposed to be in contact with him. And of course, I let her know that I was watching the house as I was instructed. If I am at that house, nobody's going to steal anything. And that was Joshua Rayborn's whole thing, is that if somebody is there, nobody's going to steal anything. This is my job. This is my one and only job for him. So, of course, when he gets home, it's him and Amy. They're both fucked up. They're surprised to see me there, and what does he do? He comes up on the front porch, fucked up, and starts assaulting me and yelling at me. Well, he called me back. He admitted that he was in the wrong. He admitted that I did what it is that he had asked me to do. But he shouldn't have assaulted me to begin with. And I had to go to Sheriff Scott DaCosta and his department to try to turn that in. Just like I had to try to turn in the situation with Chris Kurth to Scott DaCosta and his department. Just like I had to try to turn in the situation with Robert Franklin Mornick, the registered Nebraska sex offender, to Scott DaCosta. I had to try to turn in Leslie Snell to Scott DaCosta. She works for Scott DaCosta. I had to try to turn in Scott DaCosta's deputies to Scott DaCosta. What did he do? Broke the law, covered for him. Helped to send me to prison on false charges. How many of y'all were aware that you can go to prison in Nebraska just from being charged with misdemeanors? That you can be repeatedly assaulted, threatened, harassed, intimidated, physically, sexually, financially, and even have your government insurance taken away over false charges by a bad cop. And all it takes to make a difference is one person actually standing up with the fucking victim and saying enough is enough. Not telling the victim, oh, well, yeah, enough is enough. Somebody needs to do something. How about in general saying someone should recognize that you are someone? When your idea of helping me is to tell me that you're sorry and talk about you for the next 4 hours, or to interrupt me over and over again to tell me your assumptions, I'm telling you facts and sending you evidence. What the hell are you doing? You're arguing without even looking at the evidence. Meanwhile, this all come from a feller in the South, Winfield Scott Hancock, who couldn't follow the rules when it come to an occupying army. Couldn't implement the controls that were needed in order to guarantee a functional democracy. Then black people in the South are actual people. They're actual human beings. And they should be allowed to vote, as all homeless people should. In the United States, there is no reason, number one, that we should actually have anything close to homelessness in the United States. Number two, with the excesses which we are capable of, there is no reason that we cannot end world hunger within 2 years. The only reason it would take 2 years is because of farming and infrastructure. The farming requires production time, but we tell a lot of farmers not to produce. But the primary infrastructure would be getting it to the world markets. And I do say markets for a reason. You have to stimulate the merchant class. But the merchant class should not be, well, as we have it today, where we've got giant conglomerates owning everything and everyone, and every piece of property, and every cattle, and every license for your boats, for your car, for your ability to drive, for your pets. We need more money, more money, more money, more money for all these programs that, are they doing any good? Are they really helping out the people for which they were created? Are these services really helping out disabled people who are at risk, who have no friends or family that actually care enough to help? Are these places performing their duties to actually help? No, they're not. They're riding the clock. They're making you come back week after week. And every week that you're going back for therapy, when you were literally sent there because they're supposed to help you, to turn in the abuses against you, you're supposed to do this right away. And now these are the people that you're supposed to go to because you have no friends or family. You're supposed to go to Marcia Estrada and you're supposed to go to Penny Cooper. Or you're supposed to go to Jen Beebe and you're supposed to go to Nicole Peralta. Or you're supposed to go to Nicole Peralta and you're supposed to go to Tamara. Now, why is it there's two people in each one of those situations? Because you've got a therapist and a caseworker. Your caseworker in that situation is supposed to be your advocate. Your advocate is supposed to act as a friend or family member in situations of abuse, which means that they're supposed to turn it in immediately. But then they tell you it's not their job, it's not their job, it's not their job. It absolutely is, according to the law, according to the paperwork. Because I don't have a friend or family member, I'm supposed to go to you mental health people. And you are supposed to be mandated reporters, and you're supposed to help me turn it in immediately. Not make me go to appointment after appointment after appointment after appointment. Before Natalie was killed, I went to appointments for it was actually over a full year. Going back and forth between Nebraska and Colorado so I can see Nicole Peralta and see Tamara. And of course, here's the situation. Tamara quit. When she quit her job, that's actually when I moved to Colorado. I was told over and over again I had to go to the Front Range of Colorado to get these services. So I'm spending all of my money to go to these services that don't actually exist. So I end up going to Nicole, God, what was her last name? Nicole Gerald. She's one of my abusers. I had to go to her because she's a therapist to try to figure out where this help on the Front Range was supposed to be. She referred me to Jeff Ritter with the Colorado Coalition of the Homeless. So then I'm jumping through all these hoops to go to all these appointments with Colorado Coalition of the Homeless, and they're doing the same thing that was being done in Nebraska. They're just riding the clock. They're not doing anything about the abuse. Jeff Ritter's telling me I have to get paperwork before I can do anything with courts. I'm like, how do I get the paperwork? At that point in time, I was completely clueless. What I knew is that I'd been going to just about everybody I could to try to get help. I was trying to explain to everybody who said that they would listen, said that they would help me. I tried to explain to them what was going on, what it is that the lawyers that I had contacted had told me. Hey, you know what? If this stuff is actually happening, because you called mentally ill, all right, this is a really shaky ground right now. If you watch on the TV, and one of these lawyers really went off about the TV. He wanted me to watch on TV about the whole mentally ill thing and how it's a real hot topic and a hot debate, but also how the way that they're viewed, people don't want to pick up that case. And they have to have an advocate or a guardian, or they're not supposed to. You have to have a friend or family member who cares to actually advocate for you, because none of these advocacy agencies are gonna, not unless you know your rights and your friend or family member knows your rights. Now, if you are an at-risk adult and you are sent to one of these mental health places because you're abused, and your friend or family member goes in with you, then that place does their job. I've seen it with my own two eyes. I have been a part of it, having gone in with multiple disabled people who have been abused in front of me. When you go in with them, they're supposed to do something immediately, and they're supposed to stay there with you for your own protection and your own safety. If those cops try to blow you off, and your friend or family member knows your rights, and you know your rights, then you can actually get something accomplished. But alone, that term mentally ill is just too powerful. It makes us into slaves. No matter how harmed we have been, no matter how injured we are, you just want to keep on pushing that slavery. Go to work, go to work, go to work, go to work. Go to work for what? To be abused into moving before I get a paycheck? To go 2 weeks without eating because I can't afford to go to the homeless feeds, because if I do, I'll lose my job? I got to find a job I can actually work. I got to try to find it without an address, without a home over my head, while having to be afraid at all points in time that I'm going to be harassed for even existing in a parking lot. I don't want to be here. This isn't optimally where I would like to be in my life. It was not my choice to be victimized to this point. It was not my fault for the American people to hate the mentally ill so much that they will literally look the other way while we are harmed until we are killed, until we freeze to death, until we are beaten to death, until we are shot for existing. Meanwhile, our friends and family show that they don't care about us. We're not the fun friends. We're the wallflowers. See, we've got all these people who have friends and also call us friends, but they tell us all their little secrets. Mostly when we need help, when we're being abused and we need help, these people interrupt us to tell us stories about them being abused or their family being abused. And here's the thing, your abuse just happened. You need help turning it in or it's going to happen again. But these people can't stop talking about the time that they were abused, even if it was 30 years ago. And then you're abused again and again and again and again, and people just want to keep on telling you stories about them. And they won't stop telling stories about them. And that's how we end up with slavery, especially modern day slavery. That's how we end up in a society where, well, war is more important than saving lives. A society where we pretend that by sending people to go kill people, we are saving lives. We are making lives better. By blaming the victims, we are creating a society where, well, of course, empowerment cannot be allowed. Only the most physically fit, physically attractive, and rich should be allowed anything. That's what the United States has sold to the whole world by what we show. What we show versus what we say are not the same. The British obviously make fun of us often for that. How they have more of the American Constitution now than we do. They're absolutely right. Here it's a constitution only in name. In actuality, it is not observed. And none of these soldiers that we are told that we owe have fought for our actual constitution. I'm told what I owe them. I don't owe them shit. There are a lot of dead soldiers that fought for rights that I'm supposed to have and died for us all to have those rights. For modern soldiers who weren't even alive the last time we had actual constitutional rights, tell us about how we owe them for our constitutional rights. Have you read the Constitution? Or did you read the Wikipedia version that believes the Second Amendment is a hunting law? The Roman rental agreements screwed over the Romans so horribly that their entire society fell apart. The whole thing. Because it's slavery by way of housing. By way of necessity. The happier people are, the more likely they are to be productive in society. But when they are worried about basic survival, what they're after is basic survival. And fuck your plan for the nation. If they don't survive for the next however long it's going to take for them to get unhomeless or completely unfucked, they're not being a productive member of your society, are they? They're being a drain on your society while you're treating them like crap for being a drain on your society. No matter how hard they work to try to not be a drain on your society, you just won't stop reminding them, as well as telling them that they've got plenty of options. But then you Well, you're telling them that they get this magic job with their disabilities. Are you going to give them this magic job with their disabilities, or are you just talking out your ass about it? Are you making sure that the laws that are supposed to be in place, are you making sure that these laws are actually, well, with teeth, as they say? Or are you saying, oh, well, I'm just going to trust them to follow the law. I'm going to trust them to be their own checks and balances. So I was watching this show today about American checks and balances and about how the British believe that our checks and balances system is more functional than it truly is. It was a British feller who was making the video, and it was obvious that, well, he believed American propaganda, but ain't looking at the seriousness of the situation we're actually in. America is fast becoming a third-rate superpower. Yeah, we're stronger than everybody else, sort of, but look at our economy tanking. Look at the cost of things. And how steadily and quickly it's going up. People don't want to work anymore. And a lot of people can't work anymore. You have abused the shit out of them and given everything to a bunch of assholes who don't do nothing. Why is the working class the poor class in this country? If you're out there tossing logs into a skid loader 8 to 16 hours a day, you should be for certainly getting paid enough money to fucking survive on. I take that back. To live on, because you're working a full-time job. It's one thing to expect people to work like that during the wartime economy, when you're actually being harmed, when your family is in danger of being harmed. It's another to expect and to push and to force that onto a society during peacetime. To expect those wartime taxes to remain in place. Those wartime expectations to remain in place. Many of the emergency enactments that were created back during World War II are still in place today. How stupid is that? These were emergency enactments. We were never meant to pay this much for this long. And especially without rights. And then we got a whole bunch of people, when it comes to pot, as soon as they got the right to smoke pot, they stopped caring about anything else other than bitching. So once you got pot, now you'll only bitch about disabled people. You'll only bitch about how the mentally ill are treated. You'll only bitch about police brutality. Well, that's actually what the Second Amendment was created for. Tyranny. And here in the United States, we are tyrants against the most poor of our society, the most at risk of our society. Even our government creates laws to make it incredibly easy for predators not only to get their hands on badges and guns, but on a large variety of victims, a large variety of people they can harm at will. Press false charges on, keep them locked up and force them to plead guilty to a crime they didn't commit or crimes that they didn't commit in exchange for freedom. No, this is not justice. This is absolutely slavery. And as far as equality goes, no, we disabled people are not entitled to any of your rights. We are not entitled to any of the things that you claim that we're entitled to. Sure, on paper, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on services to help these people, but in reality, what we're doing is we're paying wages. We've got a bunch of ineffective therapists who are not doing their jobs as mandated reporters. We've got a bunch of ineffective services. Many of these services are dual diagnosis. You have to have basically a drug issue or a drug addiction or alcohol addiction or gambling addiction. They accept that one, along with whatever issue it is that you've got, such as housing. For a dual diagnosis clinic, you have to be, well, you have to be disabled in more than one way. And one of those ways, they pretty much want you always to have an addiction of some sort, because that's an additional $30,000 a year. That's if you go every single week. That's not counting the money that you're spending in gas to go to that place or the time that you're spending to go there. There's a lot of money to be had when you write down drug addict. There's a lot of money to be had when you write down schizophrenic. But it also remains that Scott DaCosta, a sheriff I'm trying to turn in, does not have the power to diagnose schizophrenia. He is a cop. Amanda Jonas does not have the power to diagnose schizophrenia. She is a cop. The evidence also shows that she listened to my predators, as I knew they would. That whole situation was predictable. That's why I did it the way that I did it, is because I knew how people would act and react. You are predictable, if nothing else. Now, how about we get rid of stupid Jim Crow laws that victimize the shit out of all of us? We create and designate places for the disabled and for the homeless so they can actually recover well enough to be productive members of our society. But how can they do that if they are constantly running around trying to take care of their basic needs while trying not to lose everything? And their guilt is assumed all the time, everywhere they go. Somebody thinks that you're ugly, your car is ugly, they don't want to see poverty in their area, they don't want their property value being diminished. You no longer matter as a human being. All that matters in America is them profits. And if you being broke and homeless because you were victimized into it, if they can make money off of making you disappear, that's exactly what they're going to do. Once in a while, they're going to catch the wrong person. They're going to pick up on somebody who's not homeless. They're going to do that stuff that they have to keep on paying out. Why? Because that person ends up being a working class individual who has some connections. People who actually care. People who actually help them turn it in right away. And then we don't have any services for the homeless because the sheriff's department is having to spend it all on people who are already in houses. Because the police department is having to spend that money on people who are already in houses. Just like they did with all the money that is donated still to this day. Nationwide, there is money that is sent to sheriff's departments for services that no longer exist. And all they have to do is let that money sit there for a certain amount of time, and it magically gets turned over to that department, and across the entire country, sheriff's departments are doing this. They're in charge of safe houses that have not been open since the early 90s, and people still donate money because these sheriff's programs still keep these accounts open so that they can still take that money out. Every year they get to take out whatever amount was, of course, I believe it's, 3 years in Colorado for that? 3 years in Nebraska? 6 years in Kansas? but you also get the interest. So there's interest on that money, and you also get that interest as the sheriff's department. But where is the shelter? Meanwhile, we've got victims of domestic crimes donating houses. 7 houses were donated in Sidney, Nebraska alone for a battered woman shelter. Thousands of dollars, thousands upon thousands of dollars donated by that community for services that after 30 years, nearly 30 years, these services still aren't there. These departments are still getting that money. And of course, it's getting spent on what? When these officers screw up and somebody in a house gets to sue them for something that they do every day to the homeless. Sometimes they fuck up. That's the excuse that I'm told. Well, sometimes they screw up. It's screwed up that they would treat anybody that way, all right? The fact that you only think it's screwed up that they got busted doing it to somebody in a house, you only think it's wrong when they do it to somebody in a house, is so screwed up. And it's not just affecting homeless people. It is affecting black people. It is affecting white people. It is affecting people in houses. It is affecting people with jobs and people without. It is affecting men. It is affecting women. It is affecting our economy. Thank goodness there's a lot of people who are fed up enough to say, hey, if we're not getting anything out of it, why are we expected to contribute to your society? It's your society. All we get out of it is fucking kicked. Good to be with you. Thanks for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper and your sister's, and no victim left behind. Not even if there's a 13th Amendment that it says it's okay to enslave people if they are convicted of a crime. Not okay. Slavery is wrong because it's wrong because it's wrong.